the one on the softball team way out in right field who would miss just about every ball that came my way because I was much too preoccupied with my little drawings in the dirt with my tennis shoe. Those days seem like so far away when I'm staring at a computer screen trying to get a paper written, but this summer I've been able to put aside that world of academia and delve back into the magical world of children's art. So when I look back on this summer, I'll always remember it as one filled with wet paint and brightly colored pieces of paper, water balloons, trips to the park, and of course, worship here at Calvary, which has been such a fantastic part of my time here. I remember very vividly that first Sunday when I found myself not only just joining hands with those next to me during prayers of the people, but going all the way across the aisle to join the next person's hand as we all gathered in the center for prayer. And then coming forward for communion, not just dipping and then walking back to my seat, but when all of us gathered in a big circle around this table, as I looked across at all those faces looking back at me, I became very deeply aware of the strong bond that's shared in this congregation and the very deep sense of community. And this was really inspiring for me to come in and witness and be a part of, because this is exactly what we're called to as Christians, is this creating community together. And we see Jesus modeling this in his life and teaching, going and creating community in a culture where religion is all about rules and social norms are all about power and exclusion, to create a welcoming, serving, sharing space together. If you can think back to a couple weeks ago, Pastor Brow was preaching on the feeding of the 5,000, and this was exactly what we were talking about that week as well. That through this meal, Jesus was calling all these people together to a meal that's not about the food, because the food took care of itself, but about that sharing in the food together and creating a community on that little deserted beach away from the empire. And that each person could bring those little scraps they had to offer that would become miraculously transformed. And this kind of transformative meal is really a part of the nature of who we are as Christians. We still, at the core of worship, is gathering at the table for the meal, just as Jesus and his followers did. And in fact, for early Christians, the entirety of worship would happen literally sitting around a table at a meal together. And that banquet table tradition was one of learning and sharing and discussion, deep conversation, and of faith. And even today in our culture, eating meals with family and friends is so much a part of how we connect with those people who are close to us. So taking all these ideas of food, of table, and sharing in this new reality of Jesus, what do we make of this text for today? It's definitely a bit of a shift to go from a Jesus who's transforming an abundance of food for everyone to have their fill, to a Jesus who barely seems to toss some crumbs at this poor woman. But really, when we take a closer look, this text takes on an entirely different character. See, this woman who was coming to Jesus was a Canaanite, which was that dirty, polytheistic, idol-worshipping religion that would have seemed so detestable to the Jews of Jesus' time. And that was exactly Matthew's audience for these Judeo-Christians, these Christians that come from a strong Jewish heritage and were very intent on preserving this heritage. So the fact that we initially see Jesus rebuff this woman is more of a reflection of Matthew's audience at the time than it is of Jesus' mentality. See, Matthew was writing to these Christians right after the collapse of the Jerusalem temple. Matthew was the last gospel written, and he seems to be looking back on all these events that have occurred and saying, you know, if we would have just better listened to Jesus, if we would have maybe not been quite so stuck in our old ways and old practices, maybe things would have gone a little differently. And so, first, Matthew seems to underline this status quo of Jesus saying, well, I was sent for the chosen people of Israel, upholding that these are the religious laws and this culture of exclusion. But this woman continues pleading, saying, even the dogs get the crumbs And Jesus recognizes in this woman great faith and extends those crumbs to her, heals her daughter, and by giving those crumbs, invites her to the table, to this community that's shared together. I can't help but hear the words of Isaiah that we also heard this morning being echoed here. Thus says the Lord God, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, I will gather others to them besides those already gathered. So here we see Jesus reaching beyond these boundaries, radically breaking down barriers that society has created, and extending God's gifts to all people, not just those of a certain nationality, of a certain gender, or social standing, or religious tradition. He says that we don't have to follow a certain set of prescribed religious practices in order to have great faith, or to come receive God's healing, or to share in this meal together. You see, I find this reading to be perfect for today, on this day of the corned beef, when we'll be doing exactly what it's teaching. We'll be coming around this table here together as a congregation, gathering for this holy meal, but then extending beyond the walls of this church, into the parking lot, gathering the greater entire community, all people around a delicious meal of corn, experiencing community together. But as we know, there's much more than just corn at the corn feed. There will also be lots of art there as well, which I don't want to discount because this summer for me has been filled with art. And I feel that it serves a similar purpose as food does in this context. You see, art also brings people together and invites us into something deep and profound, breaking down barriers. And in this way, art has always been a very spiritual thing for me, this sense of moving beyond. And so to be able to share that with the children of this church and of this community, both through urban arts and also through different VBS opportunities that we've had going on this summer, has been such a great